A time comes in the life of every race when people are driven by echoes of the past to chart a course for an exalted future. Africa is a blessed threshold, as major actors in the Africa arena plots a renaissance towards common destiny. Let's pedal across the streams of yesterday, through the backstreets of Africa, to the defining roles of policymakers, the political realities of the African nation, balance of power, and the strive to sustain national interest and identity. Join us on Network Africa on Channels Television. Network Africa, the rallying point for the emergence of a new Africa.
This week on Network Africa, the CBN Governor, Sanusi Lamido Sanusi, says that out of $67 billion crude oil sales that were supposed to be remitted to the Federation account, only $47 billion has been reconciled between the NNPC and the Central Bank of Nigeria.
NNPC has said some of it does not belong to the Federation. So $6 billion MPDC. We have held the position that some of the crude shipped by MPDC is shipped from oil wells that belong to the Federation.
Then, Syria might have not met the deadline to surrender its chemical weapons, but Libya certainly has.
We visited the chemical weapons destruction facility at Ruaha. There we saw firsthand how international cooperation has successfully overcome the considerable challenges of destroying chemical weapons at this very remote location.
Plus, what's life like in South Sudan since the ceasefire?
We will institute a program in the United Nations called Rights Upfront, which means that we must act earlier on human rights violations because they can easily turn into mass atrocities.
And despite the political tension and unrest in Egypt, cockfighting remains popular. Welcome to the program. I'm Cynthia Are. Now let's start things off at home in Nigeria. Like a bad dream, the issue of unremitted funds by the NNPC to the Federation account refuses to go away, with the central bank governor, Sanusi, once again stirring the hornet's nest. On February the 4th, the CBN boss told the Senate Committee on Finance that out of $67 billion crude oil sales that were supposed to be remitted to the Federation account, only $47 billion has been reconciled between the NNPC and the Central Bank of Nigeria.
There was no vacant seat in the hall, venue of a Senate panel investigating the non-remittance of crude oil funds into the Federation account. For a public hearing of this nature, this was expected. For the past few months, there has been a chilly back and forth between the CBN governor and the NNPC over unremitted funds from all revenues. And so this public hearing by the Senate Committee on Finance to get to the root of the matter expectedly drew a diverse crowd of people. This public hearing is a follow-up to an earlier session in December last year, where the committee began investigating the allegation made by the CBN of an alleged non-remittance of $49.8 billion by the NNPC from January 2012 to July 2013. At that hearing, the CBN governor, Mr. Sanusi Lamido, made a U-turn and said so far only $12 billion was left unreconciled. But the Minister of Finance, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, at that meeting countered Mr. Sanusi, saying the figure yet to be reconciled is $10.8 billion.
And if the central bank believes that part of that...
However, at Tuesday's public hearing, the CBN governor stuck to his guns and gave another blow to the NNPC.
So let us first of all make it clear that out of $67 billion NNPC shipped, $47 billion has been repatriated to the central bank. Now what we're talking about is the balance of the $20 billion and what explanations have been given. NNPC has said some of it does not belong to the Federation. So $6 billion MPDC. We have held the position that some of the crude shipped by MPDC is shipped from oil wells that belong to the Federation. JVs that Shell went out of which NNPC took over and handed over to NPDC, which then handed over to two Nigerian companies, Atlantic Energy and Seven Energy, and transferred revenue that should come to the Federation to private hands. And I have given 3 legal opinions to this committee on the unconstitutionality and illegality of that transaction.
The CBN governor also raised some other issues questioning the operations of the NNPC.
NNPC has explained that 80% of the money they have not repatriated came on kerosene and fuel subsidy. I have submitted to this committee written evidence of a presidential directive eliminating subsidy since 2009, and NNPC needs to provide its authority for buying kerosene at 150 naira from the Federation account and selling at 40 naira, and inflicting that loss on the Federation.
The NNPC, however, is not prepared to take the allegations from the CBN line low.
CBN is a banking outfit, so I really understand why they would not understand some petroleum engineering issues, and they are not also an auditing outfit. Now what they're trying to do is to audit, and I had some statements made here that they do not have this document, they don't have that document. They are not the auditors. We have certified bodies and arms of agencies that are charged with the responsibility of auditing. They are banking, right? So what he said was not really new. We said clearly that we stated an amount that went to NPDC, and that amount was the gross lifting. But there are other streams that go back to government in terms of taxes, just like any other business player.
The Committee on Finance had instructed the CBN, the NNPC, the Ministry of Petroleum and the Ministry of Finance to reconcile their figures and get back to the committee. But till date, the chairman of the Finance Committee, Senator Ahmed McCarthy, says the committee is yet to receive the interagency reconciliation report.
It appears to me that given you have agreed, having listened to them that they are ready on the subsidy to reconcile further, to have a figure, you wait until that to have a final position from your own perspective. You don't have to agree with them, of course. Remember, at the first meeting, I said that I don't expect all of you to agree. And you said you will agree. I don't expect all of you to agree. I don't expect that we too are likely going to agree with you. I hope we do. But that is what we are doing, to see where we agree and where we don't agree, and how to resolve the areas we don't agree. The bottom line is that the Federation should not lose 1 cent. Every cent due to the Federation should be properly accounted for. That is the bottom line, and that is where we're heading. Dr. Bright, as a matter of emphasis, the reconciliation of us, because it is key to accounting for substantial part of the balance of the money to be accounted for, must be concluded within this week to enable you make the report to us.
Now, outside of our shores, but still within the African continent, of course, it's actually starting to look like what the United Nations predicted about the Central African Republic might not be far from a reality if nothing is done sooner than later. In the latest occurrence, besides 75 people being killed in the space of 1 week in the town of Boda, Central African Republic soldiers have lynched a man they accused of being a rebel. The man was stabbed and beaten to death, and then his body was burned in the capital, Bangui. The gory incident occurred not too long after the interim president, Catherine Samba Panza, finished speaking at an army ceremony. Here's more on that unfortunate incident, but viewer discretion is advised.
With scenes like this, it's pretty clear that peace remains elusive in the Central African Republic. In this video, a man is seen stamping on a lifeless body before a soldier stabs the man as he lay face down in the ground, and as residents looked on and even took photographs. Peter Buchert, Director of Human Rights Watch in Bangui, said on his Twitter feed on Wednesday that the body from the scene was later burned and that soldiers threw a grenade at a suspected ex-Seleka truck. It was not immediately clear what happened to the other man. The Seleka, now disbanded following the inauguration of new President Catherine Samba Panza last month, is deeply resented by the country's Christian majority for months of lootings and killings after they seized power. Christian militia known as Anti-Balaka or Anti-Machete in the local Sango language have since formed to counter them. The presence of about 1,600 French soldiers and about 5,000 African troops has so far failed to stop the tit-for-tat violence, which the United Nations says has already killed more than 2,000. The outbreak of violence underscores the challenge facing interim President Catherine Samba Panza in restoring order. However, it seems as though her warning fell on deaf ears as a moment later the gory lynch incident occurred. Many here, like in other parts of the CRA, believe that there is no security without the presence of foreign troops. The United Nations has warned that the conflict in the landlocked former French colony could spiral into genocide.
Speaking of conflict, let's take a look at a country which shared a very similar ordeal with the Central African Republic, that's South Sudan. After nearly 2 months of conflict, which saw about 1,000 people killed and thousands displaced, a ceasefire deal was reached 2 weeks ago. Sadly, the deal wasn't honored and more clashes continued, which saw hundreds killed. Now the humanitarian situation is so bad that SPLA troops have been involved in looting of supplies from aid groups, schools, businesses, and hospitals. As a result of the situations in both the CAR and South Sudan, the United Nations Deputy Secretary General Jan Eliasson has given the assurance that a new UN program will be instituted and their tasks will be to monitor human rights violations amid reports of mass atrocities being committed in both the Central African Republic and South Sudan.
Ellison, who was speaking at the African Union headquarters in Ethiopia on Friday, also said that monitors should be deployed to South Sudan to monitor a shaky ceasefire.
We follow with particular concern and anxiety developments around Central African Republic and Southern Sudan. We will institute a program in the United Nations called Rights Up Front, which means that we must act earlier on human rights violations because they can easily turn into mass atrocities. We are in the situation where we face these dangers right now, both in Central African Republic and South Sudan. In some cases, certainly already atrocities have been committed.
The violence in South Sudan, which is the worst since the country won its independence from Sudan in 2011, started in mid-December and has killed thousands of people and driven more than 500,000 from their homes. South Sudan's President Salva Kiir accused his former Vice President Riek Machar of starting the fighting in a bid to seize power. But Machar, who is in hiding, denies the charge and accuses Kiir of using an outburst of violence to round up his political rivals. As a result of the conflict, several other communities have also taken up weapons, and that's a situation, Eliasson said, will be difficult to resolve.
There is a great degree of hope, of wisdom on behalf of the leadership of South Sudan and, of course, the opposition movement, that they will now go the road of de-escalation. If there were any illusions about military victory in this situation, I think one should forget that when one thinks of the human consequences of fighting in this area, especially since, unfortunately, the dimension of ethnic belonging has entered the equation, and that is always very, very difficult.
The two warring factions have already signed 2 agreements, one calling for cessation of hostilities, while the other dealt with the 11 opposition members who have spent more than 6 weeks in detention.
That context, the role of
Ellison urged regional nations to South Sudan to help in the resolution of the crisis before it spills over the borders.